Tanzania just dropped a bombshell that's sending shockwaves across the global mining industry. A $523 million gold mine, the country's first major gold development in 17 years. But here's the twist. It's completely self-funded, and Tanzania owns a 20% stake. This isn't just another mining story. This is about Africa rewriting the rules of who controls its wealth, and it might just be the beginning of a continental revolution. Let's cut straight to the facts. The Nyanzaga Gold Mine represents something we haven't seen in Tanzania since 2007, a genuinely transformative mining project that could reshape the country's economic landscape. But what makes this deal so remarkable isn't just its size, it's how it's structured. Perseus Mining, an Australian gold producer with deep African experience, made a decision that's almost unheard of in today's mining world. They're self-funding the entire $523 million development. No syndicated loans, no complex financing arrangements, no external debt that could compromise the project's independence. This is cash-on-the-barrel financing that signals extraordinary confidence in Tanzania's political stability and regulatory framework. For context, most major mining projects today rely on complicated financing structures involving multiple banks, development finance institutions, and often government guarantees. The fact that Perseus is willing to fund Nyanzaga entirely from their own cash reserves and bullion stockpiles tells us something profound about how they view Tanzania's investment climate. But here's where it gets interesting for Africa as a whole. Tanzania didn't just roll over and accept whatever terms were offered. The government negotiated a 20% equity stake, meaning they're not just collecting taxes and royalties, they're actual partners in the profits. This is a fundamental shift from the extractive colonialism that has defined African mining for centuries. The numbers are staggering. Once operational in 2028, Nyanzaga will produce 200,000 ounces of gold annually, with peak production hitting 246,000 ounces. Over its 11-year lifespan, we're looking at 2 million ounces of gold. The internal rate of return ranges between 19% and 34%, with a net present value potentially reaching $617 million. These aren't just impressive figures, they represent the kind of sustained wealth generation that could transform Tanzania's development trajectory. But let's dig deeper than the headlines, because the real story of Nyanzaga isn't just about extracting gold from the ground. It's about building the foundation for long-term economic transformation. The infrastructure component of this project is massive. We're talking about a dedicated 53-kilometer power transmission line that won't just serve the mine, it'll strengthen the entire regional grid. New roads, logistics hubs, and permanent worker accommodations are being designed as lasting assets that will benefit communities long after the mine closes. This is where Tanzania is showing strategic thinking that goes beyond short-term extraction. The mine is located in the Lake Victoria goldfields, a region that's been historically rich in deposits but underdeveloped compared to neighboring gold belts in Kenya and Uganda. By positioning Nyanzaga as a hub for modern, sustainable mining practices, Tanzania is essentially creating a template that could attract more responsible investment across the region. The environmental and social governance aspects are equally significant. We're seeing water recycling systems, dust suppression measures, and strict tailings management protocols built into the design from day one. This isn't just about meeting international standards. It's about proving that African countries can demand and deliver world-class environmental stewardship without sacrificing economic development. What's particularly noteworthy is the community resettlement program. Instead of the typical corporate charity approach we've seen with other projects, Nyanzaga includes comprehensive compensation packages, new housing developments, and permanent facilities like schools and medical clinics that will be managed in partnership with local authorities. Now let's talk about what this means for ordinary Tanzanians, because that's ultimately how we measure whether these projects succeed or fail. During the construction phase alone, thousands of Tanzanians will find employment across skill levels, from general laborers to specialized technicians. But more importantly, Perseus Mining has committed to skills transfer programs designed to move local employees into supervisory and management roles over time. This isn't just about creating jobs. It's about building a domestic workforce capable of sustaining and expanding Tanzania's mining sector independently. The economic multiplier effects are substantial. A high-capacity gold mine requires an enormous supply chain. Fuel providers, maintenance contractors, catering companies, transport services. By prioritizing local sourcing wherever possible, Nyanzaga could catalyze hundreds of small and medium enterprises. Local farmers could secure steady contracts supplying food to mining camps. Logistics firms could build sustainable businesses around materials delivery. This is how one major project can transform an entire regional economy. The revenue streams flowing to the government will be unprecedented. With that 20% equity stake, Tanzania will collect direct dividends from profits, not just traditional taxes and royalties. Combined with corporate taxes and export duties, we're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars annually that can be reinvested in education, healthcare, and infrastructure development across the country. But here's the critical question: will these benefits actually reach ordinary citizens? Tanzania's success will ultimately depend on robust governance, transparent revenue management, and effective anti-corruption mechanisms. The best designed projects can still fail if wealth concentrates in the hands of a few, while surrounding communities remain in poverty. To understand why Nyanzaga matters beyond Tanzania's borders, we need to talk about what's happening across Africa, and specifically about Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré. Traoré has become the face of a new African approach to resource management, one that fundamentally rejects the old colonial extraction model. His message is clear and uncompromising. Africa must stop exporting raw wealth while importing poverty. In Burkina Faso, he's introduced sweeping reforms aimed at nationalizing key mining operations, prioritizing domestic processing plants, and renegotiating contracts that were seen as exploitative. Traoré's approach is militant in its sovereignty. Resources must be processed locally, jobs must go to citizens, wealth must circulate within the economy. No compromise, no gradual transitions, just a complete break from the old system. Now, Tanzania's approach with Nyanzaga is different. More collaborative, more willing to work within existing international frameworks. But the underlying philosophy is remarkably similar. Both countries are insisting that natural wealth must translate into domestic development, not just foreign profits. This represents a psychological shift that can't be overstated. For decades, African nations often approached resource negotiations from a position of perceived weakness, fearing that demanding too much would scare investors away. The Traoré era has normalized a completely different perspective. Africa's resources are indispensable, and global demand gives negotiating power, not vulnerability. Tanzania's willingness to secure a major stake in Nyanzaga while setting conditions for infrastructure and community benefits shows this mindset spreading from West Africa into East Africa's policy circles. We're seeing what some analysts are calling Africa's new resource playbook, one that demands local processing, domestic stakes, skills transfer, and social investment. What's fascinating is how two very different approaches, Traoré's hard sovereignty and Tanzania's negotiated partnerships, are both challenging the same outdated system. Critics argue that Traoré's confrontational methods could deter foreign investment, and they may be right in some cases. But Tanzania's model demonstrates that there's a middle path where international investors can still find attractive opportunities, just under terms that leave lasting value in the host country. This dual-track approach might represent two sides of the same coin: an Africa that's no longer willing to give away its future for short-term capital inflows. Whether through Burkina Faso's militant nationalism or Tanzania's strategic partnerships, the message is consistent. African resources must serve African development. The influence of this thinking is spreading rapidly. Across the continent, youth-led movements and civil society groups have embraced resource sovereignty rhetoric, often holding up leaders like Traoré as blueprints for rejecting neo-colonial economic structures. In this environment, Tanzania's choice to structure Nyanzaga as a domestically beneficial, infrastructure-heavy, and equity-inclusive project fits perfectly with the continental mood. Let's zoom out and look at the global context, because Nyanzaga isn't emerging in a vacuum. Demand for gold is surging amid economic uncertainty, inflation concerns, and shifting geopolitical dynamics. Central banks are buying gold at record levels, and investors are treating it as a safe haven asset. This global gold rush places Tanzania in an exceptionally favorable position. With Nyanzaga coming online just as demand peaks, the country could benefit from sustained high prices throughout the mine's operational life. But this also means external pressures will intensify, from commodity markets, foreign partners, and potentially rival nations seeking to influence Tanzania's resource policies. The timing couldn't be better for Africa's resource sovereignty movement. High global demand gives African countries more negotiating leverage than they've had in decades. Countries are finally realizing they don't need to accept whatever terms are offered. They can set conditions that serve their long-term interests. But let's be realistic about the challenges ahead. Converting resource wealth into sustainable development is notoriously difficult, and African history is littered with projects that promised transformation but delivered disappointment. The first challenge is governance. Tanzania's success will depend on transparent revenue management, effective anti-corruption mechanisms, and ensuring benefits reach ordinary citizens rather than political elites. The country has made early commitments to strong environmental and social safeguards, but delivering on these promises consistently will determine whether Nyanzaga becomes a model for success or a cautionary tale. The second challenge is market volatility. While current gold prices are favorable, commodity markets are inherently unpredictable. Tanzania needs to build fiscal buffers and diversification strategies that can weather potential price downturns. The third challenge is technical and operational. Mining is a complex business, and unexpected geological conditions, equipment failures, or environmental issues could impact production and profitability. Perseus Mining's experience in African operations provides some confidence, but every mine faces unique challenges. Finally, there's the continental challenge of maintaining momentum for resource sovereignty without falling into isolationism or anti-investment rhetoric that could ultimately harm development prospects. What makes Nyanzaga truly significant is how it fits into a broader African renaissance that's been building for years. Across the continent, we're seeing a new generation of leaders and citizens who refuse to accept that Africa should remain a supplier of raw materials to the rest of the world. This isn't just about mining. We're seeing similar movements in agriculture, where countries are demanding more value-added processing before export. In technology, where African nations are building domestic capacity rather than just consuming foreign innovations. In manufacturing, where governments are creating incentives for domestic production rather than pure import dependence. The psychological impact of projects like Nyanzaga extends far beyond their immediate economic benefits. They demonstrate that African countries can negotiate as equals, can demand fair terms, and can successfully manage complex development projects. This builds confidence that feeds into other sectors and other negotiations. As the first gold bars pour from Nyanzaga in 2028, Tanzania will face a crucial test. Will this project inspire more nations to rethink how they engage with global mining firms? Will it accelerate Africa's pivot toward industrialization and self-sufficiency? Will the benefits actually reach ordinary citizens? The answers to these questions will determine whether Nyanzaga becomes a template for African resource development or just another false dawn. But early signs are encouraging. The project's structure prioritizes long-term value creation over short-term extraction. The government's equity stake ensures sustained revenue streams. The infrastructure development creates lasting assets. The skills transfer programs build domestic capacity. Most importantly, Nyanzaga represents a mindset shift that's already spreading across Africa. Countries are no longer accepting that they must choose between foreign investment and domestic benefit. They're proving that well-structured partnerships can deliver both. This brings us to the fundamental question facing Africa today. What kind of future does the continent want for its resource wealth? Ibrahim Traoré has provided one answer: hard sovereignty, state control, and an unflinching rejection of perceived exploitation. Tanzania, through Nyanzaga, offers another answer: balanced partnerships that protect national interests while leveraging foreign expertise and capital. Both models challenge the outdated notion of Africa as merely a supplier of raw materials. Both insist that Africa's natural wealth must translate into independence and development, not dependency. The question isn't which model is right, it's whether Africa can maintain the momentum for change regardless of which path individual countries choose. What's clear is that the old extractive colonialism model is dying. African countries are no longer willing to watch their resources disappear while their people remain poor. Whether through militant nationalism or strategic partnerships, the continent is demanding a better deal. Tanzania's Nyanzaga Gold Mine is more than a $523 million investment. It's a symbol of Africa's evolution from passive resource supplier to active development partner. It demonstrates that African countries can negotiate complex deals that serve their long-term interests while attracting world-class investment and expertise. The project's true test will come not in 2028 when production begins, but in 2039 when the mine closes. Will Tanzania have used those 11 years to build diversified economic capacity? Will the infrastructure remain productive? Will the skills and institutions developed through Nyanzaga enable even greater achievements? These questions matter not just for Tanzania, but for the entire continent, because if Nyanzaga succeeds, it will prove that Africa can chart its own course toward prosperity. If it fails, it will provide ammunition for those who argue that African countries should accept whatever terms they're offered. The stakes couldn't be higher, but the opportunity is unprecedented. Africa is finally writing its own rules for resource development, and Tanzania has positioned itself at the forefront of that transformation. The golden age of African resource sovereignty may finally be beginning. The question is, will the continent seize this moment or let it slip away? What do you think? Should more African countries follow Tanzania's balanced partnership model, or is Ibrahim Traoré's hardline sovereignty approach the better path? Will gold wealth finally translate into real development for ordinary Tanzanians? Is this the beginning of Africa rewriting its entire resource future? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into African politics, economics, and the stories that mainstream media often overlooks. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest content exploring African culture, civilization, history, and the evidence of continent's glorious past and promising future. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep supporting African excellence.